Well, welcome to November. We've set the clocks back, we're wondering what to do with the leftover Halloween candy, and maybe we've already watched more than a few Christmas movies. Yes, there will always be those among us who insist on waiting until Thanksgiving or even later before getting into their Christmas spirit, but for people like you and me, I'm back with another episode. Now maybe you've seen some of the same news stories I have where a lot of radio stations have already started playing Christmas music. And maybe you're looking to liven up your podcast playlist with some new festive content. And that's why you should head over to christmaspast.media and check out the definitive directory of Christmas podcasts. It's a directory of 170 Christmas podcasts at the time of this recording, grouped into 12 different categories. There's something for everyone and almost certain to be many podcasts that you'll be discovering for the very first time. The definitive directory of Christmas podcast is the most complete and best organized listing of Christmas podcasts you will find anywhere else. I guarantee you that. So head over to christmaspast.media and scroll down on the homepage to the latest post section. The definitive directory of Christmas podcasts will remain pinned to the top of that area for the rest of the season. Also, don't forget to share a Christmas memory to appear in an episode later this season. All you have to do is record yourself into your phone's voice memo app and then send it over to christmaspastpodcast@gmail.com. Keep it reasonably short, clean, and family-friendly, and be sure to say your name and where you're from. And finally, if you take a minute to rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, I will send you an official Christmas Past sticker, and a handwritten Christmas card is my way of saying thanks. I sent 2 out just this morning, and I hope that the next one I send will be to you. So rate and review the show and then get in touch for details. Alex Palmer is the author of The Santa Claus Man, and last year he and I collaborated on what, as far as I know, is the first ever Christmas true crime podcast. For the benefit of our newer listeners, My Dear Santa, a True Crime Christmas Caper, released right here on Christmas Past last Thanksgiving Day. Scroll down to November 28th, 2019 in the Christmas Past podcast feed, and you'll find all 6 episodes there. Well, now Alex is back with an all-new book, The Atlas of Christmas. More than any other holiday, Christmas has been adapted and interpreted by different countries and communities to suit their particular culture. Alex's book aims to capture this range in all of its rich variety and explore how a tradition, whether a colorful ornament or a peculiar character, tells a much deeper story about that country and culture. The Atlas of Christmas aims to offer an entertaining survey of the many ways that Christmas is honored the world over, whether extravagant or intimate, sacred or silly. I caught up with Alex recently to discuss some of these traditions. I'll come back at the end to say goodbye, but for now, please enjoy my conversation with Alex Palmer. So Alex, something that comes up a lot on Christmas Past is the idea that the Christmas we know and love today is really just the latest version of many Christmases from the past. And a lot of the traditions we enjoy in America come from other places, but it's also true that a lot of great Christmas traditions kind of stayed where they began and never made it over to America. For example, in the Ukraine, it's common to put up spider webs around Christmas time. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, that's right. That's a tradition you wouldn't usually you'd associate spider webs with a different holiday, but in Ukraine, I think I'm pronouncing it correct. It's pavuchki. It's spelled sort of like that. It's these sort of celebratory spider webs. It's not like a creepy Halloween kind of thing. They're usually kind of beautiful silver or sparkly kind of gold cobwebs that decorate the homes. And it's not actually totally clear where exactly it came from. There's a Ukrainian folk tale about a poor widow whose children were excited about Christmas, when a Christmas tree sprang up outside their home, but because they couldn't afford to decorate it on Christmas Eve, supposedly the spiders outside heard the family weeping because they couldn't afford decorations. And so then the spiders kind of created the webs for them. So I believe that's where that's supposed to have come from, but there's other stories of where that's rooted in. But yeah, obviously you wouldn't see that. You're unlikely to see that in the States. So that's a very kind of particular Ukrainian Christmas tradition.
But another thing that, of course, is a huge part of Christmas from the very first time that we celebrate is the notion of a gift bringer. And here in America, and especially nowadays, that gift bringer is and will always be Santa Claus. However, in other parts of the world, there are other gift bringers who come along either on Christmas Eve or some other time to bring gifts to help celebrate Christmas. Can you tell us about some of the more interesting things that we'd find around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly for just the gift bringer, the Santa himself has all kinds of different versions depending on which country you go to. So you'll see a lot of like France has Père Noël. There's like Saint Basil the Great in Greece, and if you're looking, and then of course like Father Christmas in England, and it gets kind of the lines are blurred between which of these characters kind of inspired the other, and which pieces, especially because Santa Claus kind of grew out of a European tradition, but then a lot of European countries now have sort of adopted some of the elements that were kind of an Americanized version that we sort of sold back to them as it's become mass produced. But though there's those sort of classic Santa, Father Christmas sort of characters, there's also some more unique ones depending on where you go. In the Basque region, they have this character called Olentzero that's this giant mountain giant who is this very friendly fellow who he supposedly is the last of his race and kind of comes down from the mountain and brings gifts. There's the Christkindl in Germany, which kind of started as it was an actual baby. It was when kind of the sort of grew out of that Protestant Reformation as they were trying to bring things back to away from the sort of saint idea, and the saint is the gift bringer, and instead actually had a baby. It was sort of a baby Jesus that would bring the gifts to the families. That shifted now. When you talk about Christkindl, it's often just sort of a angelic child, or maybe a girl dressed in white or something like that you might see. And then of course, kind of especially throughout the Latin American countries, the three wise men are which have a much more biblical logic as gift bringers for the Christmas holiday. Those are more likely to see as the gift bringer figures, and particularly around Epiphany when the Three Kings Day is celebrated, almost as big of a holiday as Christmas itself, because it's at least more of the the gift giving kind of trappings that we usually associate with traditional Christmas. And then Italy actually has this character. Speaking of sort of biblical connections and the wise men of La Befana, and this is a character who she almost looks sort of like what you think of as a witch. Sort of the nose, sort of the broom sometimes that she has with her, and supposedly she was a character that the three wise men on their way to Bethlehem encountered and asked which way to go, and she didn't know at the time, or that she guided them, but then they they asked if she'd like to join them. She declined, and then ended up regretting and went to go find them, and supposedly she's continuing on her journey to try to find them and bringing gifts along the way as she does.
So you mentioned the Christkindl, which I've always found interesting because there was a time when Saint Nicholas and the Christkindl were supposedly going around together, either on Saint Nicholas Eve or Christmas Eve. And that is why Christkindl was later mutated into what we now refer to as Kris Kringle, like a synonym for Santa Claus. And it got me thinking that the idea of Santa Claus going around with someone to help deliver toys is something that we don't really have nowadays in America. But before, that was pretty common. And the people he would bring around with him tended to be kind of disciplinarian figures. Talk a little bit about some of those disciplinarian figures that would go around with Santa Claus.
Yeah, and that's really something as I was researching this book and just how different cultures are celebrating Christmas. And that's something, it is really something we don't have so much in the U.S. There's a real dark side to the holiday that is embraced by a lot of other countries and cultures, particularly around Europe. And probably most famously is the character of Krampus, who you find in Austria and Germany. And he's kind of a classic devil character, long nose and sort of goat-like in some ways, and kind of this fierce-looking, claws and teeth, and usually travels with a wicker basket on his back that he'll toss kids into, or whip in his hand. And he's sort of seen as the the disciplinarian, where Santa is kind of the friendly gift bringer. Then Krampus is the one for if you've been naughty. He's the one you're going to be dealing with. So it goes beyond just coal in your stockings. But there's characters like that. Krampus is the most famous, but there's a lot similar to how there's a lot of different gift bringers kind of in the mold of Saint Nick and Santa. There's a lot of different sort of Krampuses. There's Knecht Ruprecht and the character called Sert. I think I'm pronouncing that right, in the Czech and Slovak cultures going back, and then in France they have a figure named Hans Trapp. Who's, and a lot of these guys, they also have sort of a similar kind of look, or kind of just, general creeps. But I think Iceland kind of wins when it comes to the kind of the most elaborate, creepy characters. They've got Grilla, who's sort of the she's kind of a Christmas witch herself, but definitely up to no good. Her and her husband supposedly live up in the mountains, and then not only is she going out and disciplining kids or tossing them into her pot and eating them for dinner, but she's got 12 children named the Yule Lads, and each one of them sort of has their own little trick. There's like one called the Spoon Licker and Door Knocker, and they have all these different kind of clever names that they'll sort of Window Peeper is one, and Candle Stealer. So these kind of funny characters, and they sort of descend on the homes at night, and if you don't do certain things, you're going to get a visit from the Yule Lads. So she, and also kind of to round out the family, she's got a gigantic black cat as well, who also tends to be eats naughty children. So there's a real like variety there, and that's something you don't see as much in the U.S. And I don't know, you're starting to see a little more interest in that, and trying to incorporate. You see celebrations of Krampus have started popping up, and certainly nothing as elaborate as they'll have full blown parades celebrating these characters in other countries. But you don't see that so much here, but you are starting to see a real interest in those sort of darker elements of Christmas as kind of a counter programming to the cheery Christmas tunes you usually get.
And I can tell you firsthand, I was actually in Iceland a few days after Christmas, I think 3 or 4 years ago. And at the Reykjavik airport, they have this huge Grilla display where she's sitting in front of a cauldron that you can sit in and have your picture taken. And the Yule Lads, they're just everywhere. And whenever I've had the fortune to travel the world around Christmas time, you really get a sense of A, what you're missing out on, and B, this idea of like, well, why don't we do this here in America? Why don't we have the Yule Lads, or why don't we do, spider webs? It's just as festive, and it makes just as much sense as any other. As you were doing the research for your book, were there any traditions that you really thought, gosh, that would make a great addition to our Christmas here in America?
Yeah, I think, there are a number of cultures that have these great like games that they'll play. Something in the Netherlands, they have these they call it the pronunciation I won't get right, but it's like basically Saint Nick poems that they'll do, and it's this tradition where there'll be sort of an exchange of gifts, and you'll have this kind of simple poem. It's usually kind of teasing that you'll write for another person, for a loved one, family, or friend, and then you kind of are making fun of them a little bit, but then also giving them a gift. And this gift is also almost sort of a teasing thing. It's usually some elaborately packed. It's not, I wouldn't quite call it like a white elephant gift, but it has that sort of tongue-in-cheek aspect where it might be something like a small little token that's been frozen in a block of ice, or something that's a box within a box within a box. And it just really has a real playfulness to it that coming from a place that where Saint Nick is sort of been around for quite a while. It's like really found a fun riff on the holiday. And yeah, I think those kind of games, you don't see that as much. It's almost those, even, in England, the sort of, holiday parlor games and things like that. I feel like there aren't as many in this U.S. sort of little games and activities that you associate so much with the Christmas holiday. And I think that's something we could definitely be trying to incorporate more of those into our own, into sort of making that part of the Christmas tradition.
Thanks so much for listening. I sure hope you enjoyed that, and I hope maybe it gave you some ideas for things you might like to try yourself one day. 2020 is going to be such an unusual Christmas season. If you put up a spider web, no one would even blink, so now's a perfect time to try. And if you'd like to learn about even more things like that, well, why not picking up your own copy of the Atlas of Christmas? You need to look no farther than Amazon or your favorite independent bookseller. Again, that's Alex Palmer's The Atlas of Christmas. Now, I'll be back again in just a couple of days as we continue our countdown to Thanksgiving of 2020. That's when the all-new official 2020 season of Christmas Past begins, where I share the backstories to your favorite Christmas traditions and, of course, share your Christmas memories. Until we meet again, let me remind you as always that Christmas Past is produced in wonderful Willow Glen, California by yours truly, Brian Earl. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of the fun in store between now and Christmas Day, and follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you haven't yet joined the private Christmas Past Facebook group, now's as good a day as any because we're celebrating all season long. And you can drop me a line anytime, and I really wish you would because I love hearing from you. You can reach me at christmaspastpodcast@gmail.com, and that is also the email to send me your Christmas memories. Again, just record a little something into your phone's voice memo app, keep it reasonably short, clean and family friendly, and be sure to say your name and where you're from. I would love to share the things that make Christmas special to you with the rest of the Christmas Past family this year. Until we meet again, stay safe and healthy, look out for one another, and may your days be merry and bright.